Okay, once again, I'm ready to retell the story. Last month, he and his wife went on a vacation, and they hadn't traveled together for more than 2 years. So, as soon as they got a chance to get from it all, including work, the kids, and the hustle and bustle of everyday life, they just bought plane tickets and left New York to go abroad. First, they found it difficult to pick a destination that would suit them both, so they had a lot of thoughts and talked it over, and finally they decided that this time they should visit China. His wife has Chinese roots. Her great grandmother came to the US and married an American citizen, so Jessica was interested in learning more about Chinese culture, tracing her family history. And by the way, a couple of her relatives live in Shanghai, so they decided to pay them a visit. At first, he wasn't very enthusiastic about this trip, but then he did a little research on the internet and read about the landmarks and natural wonders. He was fascinated by the beauty that this country offers. And also he wanted to try out authentic Chinese food, and the choice was made. They were going to China. They usually opt for ready-made package tours, but this time they decided to plan their trip on their own without any tour operators, as they wanted to have more flexibility and freedom. They bought plane tickets online and booked the hotel rooms. First, they wanted to go to Beijing, then spend some days in Shanghai and visit his wife's relatives. They also wanted to visit a giant pandas center in Chengdu and then return to Beijing. Afterwards, the plane would take them back home to America. For an American citizen to go to China, one needs to get visa. So they filled out an application form, got their insurance, and applied for a multiple entry visa. And now they have long-term Chinese visas valid till 2028. That means that they won't need to extend it for another 10 years, and that's good because they will definitely visit it again. They were both nervous before the flight, and they left their kids at their grandparents and asked their friend to take care of their dog. Jessica spent a few hours packing their bags, making sure that she had put everything they would need. There were clothes for any kind of weather and occasion, and traveling light was never an option. He always has troubles falling asleep the night before the flight, so he stayed up late reading a Chinese guide. The next morning, they woke up late and they got dressed in a hurry, skipped their breakfast, and hailed a taxi to the airport. They were afraid to get stuck in traffic on their way and miss their flight. But when they arrived at the airport, it turned out they had nothing to worry about because all the flights were delayed due to a severe storm. Luckily, they were not cancelled, and they were happy that they had chosen a direct flight because in case they had to change flight somewhere in between, they would miss a connecting flight and be stuck in the airport for an indefinite amount of time. For the next few hours, they were sitting in a cafe, drinking coffee and waiting for the storm to be over. At last, they checked in for their flight and got their boarding passes. Their bags were weighed upon check-in, and they had to pay for extra baggage because Jessica had crammed a lot of stuff into their suitcases. Then they got in line to go through security, and they checked their bags if they had any prohibited items in their carry-on bags. Jessica had a bottle of perfume in her backpack that wasn't allowed on board, so they had to throw it away. Then they proceeded to the boarding gate, waiting for the boarding call. Finally, they got on a plane almost 4 hours later than scheduled. The flight lasted over 13 hours. Luckily, they didn't have an aisle seat. Jessica sat next to the window and he sat next to her. He was reading Chinese phrase book while Jessica was watching some comedy series on her tablet. They arrived in Beijing, went through the customs and immigration, and claimed their bags at the carousel. First, they wanted to rent a car to the city center, but they were too exhausted, and moreover, driving in a foreign country seems too risky and stressful. So they got a taxi to their hotel. They checked in at the reception, and there was one problem, some misunderstanding. They didn't have their names in database, and luckily he was armed with his Chinese phrase book, as the receptionist couldn't speak English well. So he managed to explain that they had booked a double room on booking.com, and it turned out that they misprinted their names. So the problem was fixed immediately, and he paid for the room by his credit card. Then they went to an ATM to withdraw some money and headed to the city center to explore the city. They made a stop at a currency exchange office and exchanged some of their dollars into yuan, as it was easier to pay with cash at some small cafes, taxis, and markets. The next few days flew by, and it was a blur. They were jet lagged and for a couple of days, but then got used to a different time zone. They went sightseeing, and they hired a Chinese speaking tour to show them around Beijing. They saw the Forbidden City, the Summer Palace, and the Great Wall, and some other famous attractions. They ate some local food and went to the museums. And then they took a high-speed train to Shanghai and visited their relatives. They turned out to be nice and hospitable people, so they enjoyed a city tour there and went on an excursion to some nearby villages. Afterwards, they had a tour to the Giant Pandas Conservation Center and tried out some delicious spicy food. They took a lot of pictures, and Jessica made some videos for her YouTube channel. The vacation lasted for 2 weeks, but it felt more like 2 days. They met some new people and really enjoyed their holidays. But to get a real feel for the place, he would highly recommend to go there and see everything by your own eyes.